86 people dead. A 51-day standoff. I mean, it sounds crazy, right? That's something that just couldn't happen here, but it did. Waco, Texas, 1993.
Yeah, the Waco Siege. It's one of those events that just sticks with you, you know?
Absolutely. And today, on the deep dive, we're going deep, really deep, into Waco.
We're talking about the Branch Davidians, the ATF, the FBI,
Mount Carmel.
David Koresh.
We've got a lot of ground to cover.
We do. So let's just jump right in. I think the first thing we need to do is try to understand who the Branch Davidians were.
Right.
Because they didn't just appear out of nowhere in 1993, did they?
No, not at all. They actually have a history going back decades. 1955, to be exact. That's when they split off from another group, the Shepherd's Rod, or sometimes they were called the Davidians.
Okay, so a split within a religious group. What was the reason for that?
Well, it all started with the death of their founder, Victor Houdev. He'd been preaching about the apocalypse, the second coming, all that stuff.
Yeah, and when he died, there was this disagreement about who should lead the group. So a bunch of them decided to break away and form their own community.
And that's when they settled in Mount Carmel, right?
Exactly, just outside Waco. They named it after, well, you know, Mount Carmel in the Bible.
Okay, so we have this new group settled in Mount Carmel. Where does David Koresh, or Vernon Howell, as he was known then, fit into all of this?
Oh, Koresh. He's a later chapter. But before we get to him, there's this incident in 1987 that's really important to understand. It involved Howell and some of his followers trying to get into the Mount Carmel chapel.
What were they trying to do?
Apparently, they wanted to take pictures of a body as evidence against the leader at the time, George Roden. But Roden caught wind of it, and it led to a shootout.
A shootout? Wow.
Yeah. Howell and his group ended up being charged with attempted murder.
Serious stuff.
The Rodenville Eight, they called them. 7 of them were acquitted, and the jury couldn't decide on Howell, so the charges against him were dropped.
So there was already this potential for violence within the group even before 1993.
Oh, absolutely. And it didn't stop there. After the trial, Roden got into more trouble, ended up convicted of murder and sent to a mental institution.
Okay.
And that's when Howell, or Koresh as he was becoming known, he saw his opportunity, he raised some money, settled Roden's debts, and basically took control of Mount Carmel.
So there was a power struggle even within the Branch Davidians.
Oh, yeah. It was messy. Actually, their own lawyer said they'd been involved in legal battles since, like, 1955. Always something going on with these guys.
So fast forward to the early 90s. How did the ATF get involved?
It all started with a UPS driver. Seems random, but it's true. May 1992, this driver, he's delivering a package to the Branch Davidians, and it breaks open.
What was in it?
Grenades.
Grenades. Okay, that'll get your attention.
It did. The driver, he also mentioned that they'd been getting a lot of packages from a gun dealer. So the sheriff's department, they contacted the ATF.
And that's what kicks off the investigation.
June 1992, the ATF starts their investigation. Classified it as sensitive. That means they were taking it pretty seriously.
Yeah.
They were hearing reports of automatic gunfire coming from the compound too, apparently.
So there's already a lot of suspicion surrounding the Branch Davidians at this point.
Oh, yeah. And things get even more complicated in July of 92. ATF agents meet with Henry McMahon. He was the Branch Davidians' gun dealer. He tries to set up a meeting with Koresh.
Okay.
Koresh actually offered to let the ATF inspect their weapons and paperwork. Can you believe that?
Really? Seems almost too good to be true.
I know, but the ATF turned him down.
What? Why would they do that?
I don't know. It's one of those things that just makes you scratch your head. But anyway, things kept moving forward. The ATF eventually got a search warrant and arrest warrants.
Based on what?
Well, a special agent, David Aguilera, he filed an affidavit.
What did he say?
He basically laid out everything they knew. The suspicious deliveries, the possible explosives, people in watchtowers with guns, all of that.
So at this point, it's decided. They're going to raid Mount Carmel. And there was that whole thing about a meth lab too, right?
Oh, right, yeah. Apparently the ATF brought up the possibility of a meth lab being on the compound.
Why was that?
Honestly, it seems like they were trying to justify getting more resources for the raid. Maybe even get the military involved.
Okay. Did they actually believe there was a meth lab there?
It's hard to say for sure. They claimed they had some evidence, like a delivery of chemicals and stuff. And there was this former Branch Davidian who said Koresh had mentioned drug trafficking. But it all seemed a bit thin,
Like they were looking for any excuse to go in there with overwhelming force.
Yeah, that's kind of the impression you get.
Okay, so the ATF's gearing up for this raid. Did they want to arrest Koresh specifically?
Oh, yeah. That was definitely the plan. They figured if they could get Koresh, the whole thing might just fall apart, but they wanted to grab him outside the compound.
Why was that?
Apparently, they thought he never left the place, which was totally wrong. Yeah. The Branch Davidians, they were actually pretty well connected in the community. They were friendly with some of their neighbors. They even traded at gun shows. All legal, by the way.
So they weren't these complete recluses hiding from the world.
No, not at all. But the ATF had this idea that Koresh never left Mount Carmel, so they planned to arrest him when he was out and about.
And that plan fell through because...
The element of surprise was totally gone.
How did that happen?
It's almost comical how it happened. You've got a local TV reporter sniffing around. He's trying to get directions to Mount Carmel. And who does he run into but Koresh's brother-in-law, who also happened to be a mail carrier.
No way.
Yeah, seriously. And, of course, the mail carrier tells Koresh what's up.
So Koresh knew they were coming.
He did, and what's even crazier is that Koresh told the ATF agent who'd infiltrated the group.
The undercover agent.
Yeah, Robert Rodriguez. Koresh told him point blank that they knew about the raid.
What did the agent do?
Not much he could do. He made an excuse and left. Later on, someone asked him what the Branch Davidians were doing when he left, and he said, praying.
Wow. So the raid kicks off on February 28th, and things go south really fast, like immediately.
You could say that. The ATF arrives, all geared up, and then the shooting starts.
And of course, there's this big debate about who fired first.
Right. The ATF claimed the shots came from inside. The Davidians said it was the ATF. There's even a theory that one of the ATF agents might have accidentally fired his weapon, and that set the whole thing off.
Or it could have been the dog team.
Yeah, the ATF sent in a team to deal with the Branch Davidians' dogs. Some people think they fired the first shots.
To complicate things even more, you've got these National Guard helicopters flying around.
3 of them. They were supposed to be a distraction, but they ended up taking fire too.
So it's total chaos right from the start.
It was. And right in the middle of it all, Koresh gets hit.
Yeah, pretty early on in the shootout.
In the first minute. Shot in the hand and the stomach.
Wow. And then there's that frantic 911 call.
Yeah. Wayne Martin. He was pleading for the shooting to stop. You can hear the fear in his voice on those tapes. It's chilling. He keeps saying, here they come again. And that's them shooting, not us.
It sounds absolutely terrifying. What were the ATF trying to do at this point?
They were trying to get into the compound, but they were meeting heavy resistance.
Okay.
One agent made it to the west side of the building, but he got shot almost immediately. The agents, they started firing on the buildings while the helicopters buzzed around. Some agents even climbed onto the roof.
What were they trying to achieve?
Well, it seems like they wanted to get to Koresh's room and the place where they thought the weapons were stored.
And were they successful?
Some of them got inside, they broke a window, threw in a flashbang, and found a bunch of weapons. But then they came under heavy fire.
So this raid quickly turned into a full-blown firefight.
It did. It went on for about 2 hours. Agents were taking cover behind vehicles, exchanging fire.
And as we know, there were casualties on both sides.
Tragically, yes. 4 ATF agents were killed. Steve Willis, Robert Williams, Todd McKeehan, and Conway Charles LeBleu. 16 others were injured.
And on the Branch Davidian side.
5 were killed during the raid. Winston Blake, Peter Gent, Peter Hipsman, Perry Jones, and Jadine Wendell. And 2 others were killed later, apparently by their own people after they were wounded.
So a total of 7 Branch Davidians dead.
Right.
How did the shooting finally stop?
A Lieutenant Lynch from the McLennan County Sheriff's Department, he got in touch with the ATF and negotiated a ceasefire.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, it was a tense situation. The sheriff later said that the ATF only pulled back because they were running out of ammo.
And that's when the ATF withdrew.
Pretty much. The Davidians actually let them evacuate their dead and wounded.
So there was at least some cooperation.
Yeah, for a bit. But then about 6 hours later, things went bad again. An ATF sniper shot and killed Michael Schroeder.
What happened?
He was trying to get back into the compound with 2 other guys, and the ATF claimed he fired at them.
So the situation remained incredibly volatile even after the ceasefire.
Oh yeah, big time. There was this report later that said the Branch Davidians, they actually could have inflicted a lot more casualties on the ATF if they had wanted to.
Really?
Yeah. This guy, Alan A. Stone, he wrote a report suggesting that the Davidians weren't really trying to maximize casualties.
Why not? You'd think they'd be going all out to defend themselves.
Stone's theory was that their religious beliefs played a big part. They were expecting the apocalypse, you know? They figured they were going to die defending their home, and that would be their path to salvation.
So their actions were driven by their beliefs more than anything else.
That's what Stone argued.
Fascinating. So at this point, the FBI takes over.
Right. Because federal agents had been killed, it was now an FBI case. Jeff Jamar, he was the head of the FBI's San Antonio office. He became the site commander.
Okay.
And the guy leading the hostage rescue team, the HRT, was Richard Rogers.
Didn't he have some baggage from a previous incident?
He sure did. Rogers had been involved in the Ruby Ridge standoff, and he had been criticized pretty heavily for his actions there.
Wasn't that a similar situation to Waco?
Very similar. And apparently Rogers had this tendency to, he didn't always listen to the site commander.
Okay.
He sent both of the HRT's tactical teams to Waco, which meant there weren't any reserves for a longer operation. Some people say that put pressure on them to end the standoff quickly.
Interesting. And initially, there was communication between the Branch Davidians and the outside world, wasn't there?
Yeah, they were talking to reporters on the phone, and Koresh even did some interviews. But the FBI, they quickly shut that down. They wanted to control the flow of information.
So all communication from then on had to go through the FBI negotiators.
That's right, 25 of them. And they were talking to the Davidians pretty much nonstop for the next 51 days.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
There was that moment where it seemed like Koresh was going to come out right after they broadcast his message.
Yeah. They made a deal. Koresh records this message, they play it on national TV, and then he comes out. They even played the message.
And then?
Koresh said God told him to stay put. So he went back on his word.
Classic Koresh. But they did manage to get some of the kids out, right?
Yeah, not long after that, 19 children were released. They ranged in age from just a few months old to 12 years old.
That must have been a huge relief for the negotiators.
Oh, yeah. But there were still 98 people inside.
What happened to the children who got out?
The FBI and the Texas Rangers, they interviewed them a lot. Some of those kids were questioned for hours.
What were they looking for?
Well, during those interviews, some of the kids started talking about abuse, physical and sexual abuse going on inside the compound.
Oh, that's awful.
It is, and that became one of the main reasons the FBI gave for why they eventually launched the gas assault.
They used that to justify the use of force.
Yeah, to President Clinton and Attorney General Janet Reno, they said they had to get those people out of there to protect the children.
Okay. And there was that video too, right?
Oh, yeah. The FBI sent a video camera into the compound.
What did they see?
Well, Koresh, he was showing off all these people as his children and his wives. Some of them were really young, and a lot of them said he was their father.
So he was having children with these women.
It seems that way. It's estimated he might have fathered 14 of the children who were still inside.
And what about the claims of people being held hostage?
On that video, a bunch of the Davidians said they were staying there willingly. No hostages.
But the FBI didn't believe that.
Not entirely. The FBI's logs show that they were worried that if that video got out, people would start sympathizing with Koresh.
Makes sense. So as the siege went on, what was Koresh saying? Why wouldn't he surrender?
He kept saying he needed more time. He had to finish these religious writings, about the 7 seals of Revelation, then he'd come out.
So he was stalling.
Pretty much. And the thing is, he'd talk for hours, just going on and on about these biblical interpretations.
Did the FBI negotiators understand any of it?
Not really. They started calling it Bible babble.
Yeah.
They just couldn't connect with him on that level.
It sounds like a classic communication breakdown.
It was. But they did try to get some help from experts. They brought in these 2 Bible scholars, Philip Arnold and James Tabor.
Okay. What did they do?
They studied Koresh's radio broadcasts, trying to make sense of his theology. They even went on talk radio themselves, hoping Koresh would hear them.
Did he?
Yeah, apparently he did. And get this, Koresh actually asked the FBI if he could talk to Arnold directly.
What did they say?
They said no.
What? Why?
I don't know. It's baffling. But anyway, Arnold and Tabor went on the radio again, and they basically said that if Koresh surrendered peacefully, his message would reach more people. Like the Apostle Paul writing from prison.
Interesting. Did that have any effect on Koresh?
Koresh's lawyer brought him a tape of the broadcast, and apparently he liked what he heard.
So there was some hope there.
Maybe, but it wasn't enough. Things were getting worse. The FBI, they were getting more and more divided about what to do.
What do you mean?
Well, there was one group that still wanted to negotiate, but then there was another group that wanted to use force to end the standoff.
Okay.
And as time went on, they started using more aggressive tactics, like they'd blast loud noises all night long. Jet engines, pop music, even recordings of rabbits being slaughtered.
That's messed up.
Yeah, they were trying to wear the Davidians down, keep them from sleeping.
Did it work?
Not really.
Yeah.
They also started using these armored vehicles, Bradleys and these combat engineer vehicles, CEVs, they called them, basically tanks.
They brought in tanks to a standoff with a religious group.
I know, it sounds crazy. But they did. They used them to destroy fences, crush cars, even drive over one of the Davidians' graves.
That's not going to help the situation.
No, it wasn't. A lot of experts at the time, people who studied these kinds of groups, they were warning the FBI that these tactics were backfiring.
How so?
They said it was reinforcing the Davidians' apocalyptic beliefs, making them think they were in this end-of-times battle.
So instead of persuading them to surrender, the FBI was actually pushing them further into their own ideology.
Exactly.
So as April came around, how was Koresh acting? Any changes in his behavior?
He actually got even weirder. He started saying he was the second coming of Christ, really doubling down on his beliefs.
What were the negotiators saying at this point?
They were getting really frustrated. Koresh had stopped talking to them altogether during Passover. He said God told him not to speak.
It sounds like the situation was becoming more and more hopeless.
Yeah, it was. The FBI was running out of options. They even considered using snipers to take out Koresh and some of the other leaders.
Seriously?
Yeah. And they were also really worried about a mass suicide, like Jonestown.
Did Koresh ever say he was planning that?
He always denied it. And the people who had left the compound, they hadn't seen any signs of that happening.
But the FBI didn't believe him.
They didn't. It was a major concern for them.
So we come to April 19th. The day of the final assault. Why did Attorney General Reno give the go-ahead for that?
She said it was because conditions inside the compound were getting worse and because of the alleged child abuse. That's what she told President Clinton.
What did Clinton say?
Well, he actually suggested a longer blockade at first, like they did with the CSA in Arkansas back in '85.
But Reno talked him out of it.
Yeah. She argued that the HRT was getting tired, that the standoff was costing a lot of money, that the Davidians could hold out longer than the CSA did, and that there was this threat of sexual abuse and mass suicide.
So Clinton gave the green light.
He did. It's worth mentioning that Reno's justifications for the gas attack, they kind of changed over time.
How so?
At first, she was saying Koresh was abusing children and hurting babies, but the HRT guys, they contradicted that.
Okay.
Then she said that this militia group, the unorganized militia of the United States, they were heading to Waco to help Koresh or maybe even attack him.
So she kept changing her story.
It does seem that way.
Okay, so the assault begins.
Yeah.
What did the FBI throw at the Davidians?
They went in heavy. 50 caliber rifles, armored CEVs. The plan was to use explosives to blow holes in the compound and then pump in CS gas, tear gas.
They were hoping to force them out with the gas.
That was the idea. The plan was to increase the amount of gas over 2 days. No direct assault, at least not officially.
But the agents could fire back if they were shot at.
Right. And the FBI, they claim they got advice from a bunch of experts about the CS gas, making sure it was safe and all that.
So they start pumping in the gas. But there's also this thing about pyrotechnic tear gas rounds. What's that all about?
Okay, so early in the morning on April 19th, the HRT fired 2 military CS gas rounds at a construction site the Davidians were using.
Okay.
Then they started using these 40-millimeter Ferret brand CS gas rounds, which were fired from grenade launchers.
Right.
But they ran low and tried to get more from the Texas Rangers. But those rounds turned out to be pyrotechnic, meaning they used explosives to disperse the gas.
So they accidentally used the wrong kind of tear gas.
Not exactly. The FBI admitted that they did fire 3 of those pyrotechnic rounds, but they claim it was at a concrete pit, not the main bunker. And they say it was downwind and away from the living quarters.
So they're saying those rounds couldn't have started the fire.
Right. They claim those are the only military tear gas rounds they used that day.
So how did the Davidians react to the gas?
They didn't come out for hours. They either hid in their underground bunker or they used gas masks. Around 9:04 a.m., they put up a banner that said, "We want our phone fixed."
They wanted their phone fixed.
Yeah. It's kind of strange. The FBI kept pumping in the gas. Their surveillance recordings actually caught some conversations from inside the compound.
Like what?
They were talking about fuel, about throwing the tear gas canisters back out. At one point, one of the Davidians says, "The fuel has to go all around to get started." Then another voice says, "Well, there are 2 cans here, if that's poured soon."
So they were definitely talking about fuel and fire.
They were, and those recordings became really important later on.
Okay, so we get to the fire. It starts around midday, right? What happened?
According to the government, between 11:17 a.m. and 12:04 p.m., The FBI surveillance tapes picked up some pretty incriminating stuff.
What do you mean?
You've got people saying things like, "I want a fire, keep that fire going. Do you think I could light this soon?"
Oh, man. That doesn't sound good.
It doesn't. The government took that as evidence that the Davidians started the fire on purpose around 11:30. And some of the survivors, they actually testified that Coleman fuel had been poured inside the compound.
So there was fuel ready to go.
Right. The fire experts who worked on the Danforth report, they said there's no doubt that multiple fires were started intentionally inside the buildings.
And when did the fire actually break out?
Around 12:07 p.m., flames were seen in multiple locations at the front and back of the main building.
So it was pretty much simultaneous.
Yeah, and one FBI agent said he actually saw a Davidian lighting a fire near the front door.
So there's at least one eyewitness account.
There is, and right after that, Ruth Riddle, she comes out carrying Koresh's manuscript.
She saved his writings from the fire.
It seems like it.
So the fire starts spreading.
Fast. It was a windy day, and the breaches the FBI had made, they just made it worse.
Okay.
The fire trucks, they were delayed getting there. At 12:25, there's this huge explosion on the left side of the compound.
And what caused that?
The FBI said it was the ammunition cooking off.
Right.
The roof collapsed, more explosions. By 12:55, the fire was pretty much out. The whole place was leveled.
And Koresh.
They confirmed he was dead around 3:45 that afternoon.
It's just an awful, awful tragedy.
It is.
How many people made it out of that fire?
Only 9. Everyone else died.
Including all the children.
Yes. It's heartbreaking.
What did the autopsies show?
Well, some of them died from the collapsing building, smoke inhalation, but a lot of them, they were shot. At least 20, including Koresh and 5 kids under 14.
Shot. By who?
That's the big question. The medical examiner, he thought maybe it was mercy killings, to spare them from the fire. But the special counsel's expert, he said it could have been suicide, execution, maybe even forced execution. It's not clear.
Wow. A lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah. And they found a lot of bodies in that bunker, along with a ton of weapons and ammo.
So they were definitely well armed.
Oh, yeah. The Texas Rangers, they did an arson investigation, and they said that a lot of the Davidians either couldn't get out or they chose not to. But some other fire experts from the University of Maryland, they disagreed. They said there was enough time to escape if people had wanted to.
So even the experts can't agree.
That's right.
After Waco, there was a lot of finger pointing, right?
Oh, yeah. A lot of people were blaming the ATF for the way they handled the initial raid.
What about the FBI?
They got their share of criticism, too. The new ATF director, John Agaw, he came out and criticized the raid. And the Treasury Department, they did this internal review, the Blue Book, they called it, made it required reading for all new ATF agents so they wouldn't repeat the same mistakes.
Trying to learn from the tragedy.
Exactly. And the FBI, they changed a lot of their procedures, too. They started focusing more on negotiation, beefed up the HRT, improved communication between agencies, and made sure they did proper reviews after any similar incidents.
Seems like they realized they really messed up.
Yeah.
And the surviving Branch Davidians, what happened to them?
They put them on trial. It was a long trial, almost 2 months. 4 of them were acquitted on all charges,
Wow.
but 5 of them were convicted of aiding and abetting manslaughter, and 8 more were convicted on weapons charges.
What kind of sentences did they get?
It varied. Some got as much as 40 years.
40 years.
Yeah. And some of them were British and Canadian citizens. They complained about the conditions in prison, said they were abused.
Sounds like the fallout from Waco was huge.
It was. Some of the Davidians even sued the government, but they lost. The court basically said they started the fight and that they were responsible for the fire.
So legally, the government was in the clear.
More or less.
And the media, they got slammed for their coverage too, right?
Oh, yeah. A lot of people said they were sensationalizing the whole thing, giving Koresh too much attention.
Like they were making him into a celebrity.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And some people even said that the media attention might have fed Koresh's ego, made him think he was even more important than he was.
That could definitely have contributed to the standoff dragging on.
It's possible.
And there were just so many unanswered questions and conspiracy theories coming out of Waco.
Oh, yeah. It was a mess.
Like that whole thing about who fired the first shot.
Right. And the missing front door to the compound? Some people said the government took it because it had evidence on it, but the fire investigator said that probably wasn't true.
Okay.
And then there was Rick Allen Ross, this cult expert who was advising the authorities.
What was wrong with that?
Well, a lot of scholars, people who actually study religion, they said Ross was a bit of a hack, that he was biased against groups like the Branch Davidians.
So they were relying on someone who wasn't really an expert.
It seems like it. And there's this writer, Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote about how some real experts, these guys, Arnold and Tabor, they were actually making progress with Koresh, helping him to see things in a different light.
But then the FBI went in with the gas.
Right. Gladwell thinks they pulled the trigger too soon, that maybe those scholars could have gotten Koresh to come out peacefully.
It's certainly possible.
It is. And then there were all these issues with the FBI's recordings, the ones they used to prove the Davidians started the fire. Some people said the recordings were edited or misinterpreted.
So the evidence wasn't as clear-cut as the FBI made it seem?
It was definitely murky.
But even if the Davidians did start the fire, didn't they have a reason to do it? I mean, the FBI was attacking their home.
That's a valid point. And it's important to remember that the Davidians had talked about fire before. It was a big part of their beliefs. And some survivors, like Graham Craddock, they said they saw people moving fuel around and hurt someone.